If you're lying in bed right now, close your eyes. Breathe slowly and let your thoughts quiet down. The world outside can wait. Tonight, you will drift through the story of a boy who wasn't the biggest, the strongest, or the fastest, but who believed that the mind could become a weapon sharper than any blade. This is the story of Joshua Kimmich, the boy who refused to be average. In the small German town of Rottweil, where the air smelled of wood and rain, a young boy spent his days with a ball that never left his feet. The fields were small, the goals even smaller, but in his imagination they were stadiums filled with noise. He was quiet, almost shy, the kind of child who listened more than he spoke. His parents described him as stubborn. Once he decided something, no one could change his mind. But that stubbornness would one day become the foundation of greatness. He wasn't born extraordinary. When he joined the local youth club, no one pointed at him as the future of German football. Coaches said he was talented but ordinary, disciplined but unremarkable. They said he didn't have the physical presence to dominate a game, but while others trained their bodies, Joshua trained his mind. He studied every movement on the pitch, how the ball bounced, how a player positioned his body, how decisions were made in seconds that changed everything. Football wasn't just sport to him, it was a puzzle, and he intended to solve it. He would come home after training and watch matches for hours, not for entertainment but for education. While other kids dreamed of scoring goals, he wanted to understand why goals happened. He paused videos, rewound them, took notes in a small notebook his father had given him. He'd write things like anticipation before movement or think before the pass. His parents sometimes worried that he was too serious, too focused for a boy his age. But Joshua smiled when they asked him if he ever got bored. "You can't get bored," he said softly, "when you're learning how to be better." At school, he wasn't popular or loud. He sat near the window watching the clock, counting the minutes until he could return to the pitch. His classmates teased him, said he'd never make it, said he was too small. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. He stored their words quietly as motivation. When others laughed, he worked. When others rested, he analyzed. He began to understand something that would define his life. Talent was temporary, but discipline was forever. His first real coach, a man named Thomas, noticed something unusual about him. "He doesn't just play," he told Joshua's parents. "He reads the game. He sees things before they happen." It was true. Joshua's eyes moved constantly, scanning, anticipating, learning. Even at 12, he played like a general commanding a silent army. He wasn't satisfied with just doing his job. He wanted to know everyone's. But talent wasn't enough to escape small towns. He needed a chance, and that chance came when RB Leipzig's scouts saw him play. They weren't looking for him. They had come to see another player. But what caught their eye wasn't his goals or tricks. It was his presence. The way he controlled the tempo, the way his teammates listened to him even though he was the youngest. After the match, a scout approached him and said, "You don't play like a boy. You play like a plan." The invitation to join Leipzig's academy came soon after. For Joshua, it meant leaving home, leaving friends, leaving the comfort of the familiar. His parents were nervous. Their son was quiet, gentle, not like the bold city kids. But he looked at them and said, "If I don't go now, I'll never know how far I can go." There was no argument left to make. When he arrived at the academy, the difference was immediate. Everything was faster, sharper, louder. Players bigger than him, stronger than him, looked at the new arrival and smiled with quiet disbelief. He looked too small, too polite. But that first impression never lasted long with Joshua Kimmich. In training, he absorbed everything. Every instruction, every mistake, every word. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He studied his teammates' strengths and weaknesses until he understood how to make them better. He played as a defender at first, because the coaches said he lacked the attacking instinct for midfield. He accepted it without complaint, but deep down he knew what he was meant to become. "Defense teaches you humility," he would say later. "Midfield teaches you responsibility." The academy taught more than football. It taught competition and loneliness. He lived in a small dorm room, far from family, waking before dawn to train. He missed home, his parents, his friends, but when the sadness came, he used it. Every pang of homesickness became a reason to work harder. He wanted to make the sacrifice mean something. His coaches admired his focus, but sometimes worried about his intensity. "You need to rest," they told him. "You can't train all the time." He nodded politely, then went to the gym after everyone else had left. He wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing the version of himself that existed only in his mind. The perfect player, the perfect thinker. It wasn't easy. There were games where he sat on the bench, matches where he felt invisible, but frustration never made him reckless. It made him sharper. He began to study players he admired, Philipp Lahm, Xavi, Schweinsteiger. He watched how they thought, not just how they played. He mimicked their movements in his room, memorized their body language, their calmness under pressure. Slowly, piece by piece, he built himself into something new. Not a copy of anyone, but a synthesis of everyone he respected. One cold winter evening, after training, he stayed behind on the pitch. The sky was dark and snow began to fall. The floodlights glowed faintly, his breath rising in white clouds. He placed a ball in the center circle and whispered, "One day I'll play where they play." It wasn't a dream. It was a promise. At 15, he had already earned a reputation as a perfectionist. He'd correct teammates, question tactics, argue politely but firmly with coaches. Some thought he was arrogant. He wasn't. He was obsessed. The difference was subtle but profound. Arrogance seeks recognition. Obsession seeks mastery. There were moments when the weight of it all nearly broke him. He'd call his parents late at night, saying he wasn't sure if he belonged there. The other kids seemed freer, more relaxed. "Maybe I care too much," he said once. His mother answered, "That's what makes you different, Joshua. Don't ever stop caring." He didn't. In one match against a much older youth team, Leipzig's defense fell apart. Joshua, still playing right back, could see it happening. The disorganization, the panic. He began shouting instructions, pointing, rearranging the formation. The coaches watched from the sideline in silence. The game ended in a draw, but what they saw mattered more than the result. "He doesn't play like a kid," one of them said. "He plays like a conductor." After the match, the coach approached him and asked, "Do you know what makes a great player?" Joshua thought for a moment and said, "Someone who makes everyone else better." The coach smiled. "Then you're already on your way." As the years passed, he became the soul of every team he played for. His energy infected others, calm, focused, relentless. He wasn't the loudest voice in the locker room, but when he spoke, everyone listened. There was something about the way he carried himself, the stillness of someone who already knew who he was. By 17, bigger clubs started to notice. Scouts from Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund, and others came to watch. They took notes, but their faces showed uncertainty. He wasn't tall. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't what modern football usually demanded. But one scout from Bayern wrote just 3 words in his report: unteachable intelligence. Future leader. At the time, Bayern didn't make an offer, but destiny has a way of waiting for the right moment. For now, Joshua stayed focused. Leipzig's academy pushed him harder, molding him not just into an athlete, but into a thinker. He developed a ritual. Every night before bed, he would write down 3 things: something he learned, something he did well, and something he needed to improve. It was simple, quiet, private, but over time, it became a map of his evolution. Pages filled with small lessons that would one day guide him to greatness. By 18, his style had become unmistakable. Calm under pressure, efficient in movement, fearless in Leipzig was more than just a new city. For Joshua Kimmich, it was a laboratory. Every day, every session, every conversation was another experiment, another opportunity to test the limits of focus, patience, and will. When he arrived at the RB Leipzig Academy, the first thing he noticed wasn't the modern facilities or the shiny equipment. It was the silence of early mornings. He liked to be the first one there, stepping onto the pitch when the grass was still wet with dew, the air crisp, the world still asleep. In those moments, he felt free. Nobody was watching. Nobody expected. It was just him in the game, and that was enough. Life at the academy was built on repetition. Wake up early, train, study, train again, sleep, repeat. For most players, it became a routine they endured. For Joshua, it became a rhythm he mastered. He saw beauty in repetition. Every pass, every movement, every tactical drill, All of it built patterns in his mind. He wasn't chasing perfection for applause. He was chasing control. "If I can control the ball," he once said to a teammate, "then I can control the game. And if I control the game, nothing else matters." He was one of the smallest players on the team. When opponents saw him, they smirked. They expected weakness, but they never expected his mind. Joshua's strength wasn't in his body. It was in the seconds before everyone else reacted. He read angles, distances, momentum. His anticipation was uncanny. Coaches began to whisper that he played with a sixth sense. It wasn't luck. It was obsession. After each training session, he'd walk straight to the video room, still in his boots, and ask to re-watch drills. He studied his own mistakes as if they were puzzles waiting to be solved. He didn't look for excuses. He looked for patterns. Why did he lose a duel? Why did he miss a passing lane? What did he fail to see? Each detail mattered. It wasn't self-criticism. It was construction. Every flaw was a blueprint for improvement. His coaches quickly realized that he wasn't like other players. When they spoke, he listened without blinking. When they stopped, he asked questions, too many questions. Why should the fullback press here? What happens if we invert the midfield line? Some thought he was challenging authority, but he wasn't. He was learning to think, not just to play. In his second season, the academy director began inviting him to watch senior training sessions. He'd stand silently at the edge of the pitch analyzing. Most kids would watch for inspiration. Joshua watched for information. He noted how professionals communicated, how they adjusted when things went wrong, how they carried themselves when no one was looking. Later that night, he'd write notes in his journal under the heading Behaviors of Leaders. He noticed one thing above all: real leaders didn't shout. They observed. They organized. They were calm when everyone else panicked. He wanted to become that. The academy dorms were quiet at night. Many boys would sneak out or play games on their phones until midnight. Joshua stayed at his desk, books and notebooks spread before him. He studied football theory, shapes, systems, patterns. He read quotes from managers and players. He wrote one on the wall above his bed. Intelligence is faster than strength. That mindset began to change the way he played. He stopped running unnecessarily. Every step, every touch, every look became calculated. He moved with purpose. His coaches started calling him the professor. At first, his teammates teased him. But when he began dictating matches, when he started predicting where the ball would go before anyone else saw it, the teasing stopped. In matches, he rarely shouted, but his presence could be felt everywhere. When the team was nervous, he slowed the game. When the team lost shape, he reorganized them with a single gesture. His maturity unsettled opponents and amazed coaches. They said he played with the brain of a 30-year-old in the body of a teenager. But the higher he rose, the lonelier it became. Greatness often isolates. His attention to detail made him seem distant. Some teammates said he cared more about systems than friendship. He didn't deny it. "If we win," he said once, "you'll understand me." He wasn't cold, he was focused. One evening after a tough loss, the team sat in silence in the locker room. The coach was furious. Joshua stood up slowly and said, "We didn't lose because they were better. We lost because we stopped thinking." The room went quiet. He wasn't scolding anyone. He was reminding them of something simple. The mind wins before the body does. Off the field, he stayed humble. He called his parents every few days, told them about training, about small victories and mistakes. His father told him to enjoy life more. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. Joshua replied softly, "But I have to try." He started watching Pep Guardiola's Barcelona religiously. The way Busquets positioned himself, the way Xavi always offered an option, the way Messi created space by moving 2 meters sideways. It was a form of art. He didn't just admire them. He studied them like a scientist studies reactions. "They make the complex look simple," he wrote once. That's the real genius. At Leipzig, the coaches began testing him in new positions: fullback, midfielder, center back. Most players would be frustrated. Joshua saw it as an opportunity. "If I can understand every role," he said, "I can understand the whole game." And that became his philosophy: total comprehension. He wasn't building a career, he was building a mind. The academy's psychologist once asked him, "Do you ever feel afraid on the field?" He smiled. No, he said, because I already know what I'm going to do before it happens. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity, the kind that comes from thousands of invisible hours of preparation. His big breakthrough came one spring afternoon. The senior coach needed a player to fill in for an injured midfielder. The staff hesitated. Joshua was small, untested at that level. But one assistant said, "He's ready. He understands the game better than anyone." They gave him the chance. The match started fast and physical. Within minutes, Joshua was pressed, tackled, shoved. But he didn't panic. He adjusted. He found rhythm. Soon, the flow of the game began to shift. His short passes found space, his calmness spread. By halftime, the coach just nodded. "He's one of us now," he said. After the match, an older player patted him on the shoulder and said, "You don't play like a kid." Joshua smiled slightly. "I don't think like one either." His rise through the ranks accelerated. RB Leipzig, still a young project at the time, relied on players who could combine energy with intelligence. Joshua became their blueprint, proof that brains could outshine brawn. He wasn't a star yet, but the people who understood football began to notice. One of them was Pep Guardiola. Watching from afar, Pep admired the young German's precision. "He thinks football," he said privately to his staff. "Not many do." At that moment, Joshua didn't know it yet, but his next mentor had already taken note. As he matured, his personality began to mirror his playing style. Sharp, structured, but human. He started helping younger academy players, correcting their positioning, encouraging them when they doubted themselves. When Joshua Kimmich first arrived in Munich, the city felt too big, too polished, too fast. The stadiums glowed like monuments, and everywhere he looked, history stared back. Lahm, Schweinsteiger, Neuer, Müller. Bayern Munich wasn't just a football club. It was an empire. And in that empire, newcomers had two choices: adapt or disappear. He stepped into the training ground on his first day, carrying nothing but a small backpack and a heart full of questions. The grass looked greener, the pace sharper, the energy colder. The veterans barely looked at him, not out of disrespect, but because Bayern had seen hundreds of hopefuls before. They knew how many never made it, but Joshua wasn't there to blend in. He was there to learn and to prove. When Pep Guardiola approached him after the first training session, Joshua felt something shift. Pep was unlike any coach he'd ever known. He didn't shout. He didn't lecture. He observed, eyes sharp, hands always moving as if arranging invisible pieces on a chessboard. "Do you know why you're here?" Pep asked quietly after their first session. Joshua hesitated. "Because I work hard?" Pep smiled slightly. "No, because you think." That moment stayed with him forever. From then on, Joshua became the student and Pep became the teacher he had always been waiting for. Guardiola spoke to him not as a player, but as an equal mind. "Football is geometry," he told him once. "Every pass has an angle, every space a value." Joshua nodded, memorizing every word. He wasn't the kind of player who relied on instinct. He relied on understanding. In Pep's system, complex, fluid, intellectual, was the perfect match. But learning under Guardiola was not easy. It was exhausting. Every mistake was analyzed, every movement corrected, every thought challenged. During one video session, Pep paused the footage and asked, "Why did you pass here?" Joshua answered confidently. Pep shook his head. No. You had 3 seconds before you received the ball. That's when the decision is made." It was overwhelming. But to Joshua, it was a gift. He began arriving earlier to training and staying longer after. He'd walk around the pitch alone, tracing tactical shapes in the grass with his boots, rehearsing decisions before they even existed. When other players left, he stood still in the middle of the field, thinking. "I'm not the fastest," he told himself, "but I'll think faster than all of them." At first, he played as a right back. It wasn't his dream position, but Pep believed he needed to understand defense before commanding the midfield. Joshua accepted it. He always did. When a journalist asked if he was frustrated, he smiled softly and said, "Every lesson has a purpose. I'll learn this one too." His debut came sooner than expected. Bayern was struggling with injuries, and Pep, to everyone's surprise, started the young Kimmich in a crucial match. The pressure was immense. The stadium was packed, the lights blinding, the noise overwhelming. As the players walked out, he felt his pulse in his throat. He took one deep breath and remembered his mother's words. Don't stop caring. When the whistle blew, fear vanished. Instinct and intellect took over. His positioning was perfect, his timing sharp. He wasn't playing to impress, he was playing to belong. Midway through the match, Pep shouted something in Catalan that Joshua didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Approval. Bayern won. Reporters praised the veteran players, but Pep mentioned only one name afterward. Kimmich, he said. A boy who understands football. From that day, everything changed. Teammates started seeing him differently. He was still quiet, still polite, but his confidence was louder now. He trained like someone who knew exactly where he was going. Lahm, his idol, began to notice. The captain took him aside one day and said, "You remind me of someone I used to be." It was the highest compliment Joshua could ever receive. Pep continued to shape him, pushing him beyond comfort. Sometimes the lessons felt brutal. After one match where Kimmich made a rare mistake, Pep approached him in the tunnel. "You played well," he said, "but you thought like a defender, not a midfielder. You reacted. You didn't anticipate." Joshua nodded, frustration in his chest. He hated mistakes not because of pride, but because they were lost lessons. That night he watched the match 3 times before sleeping, searching for the moment Pep had meant. But it wasn't always praise. Pep demanded everything: control, composure, perfection. Once, during a Champions League match, Joshua played nervously. After the game, Pep hugged him tightly in front of cameras. The world thought it was affection. It wasn't. Pep whispered, "You're better than this. Don't ever play small again." That sentence burned in Joshua's mind. The bond between them became something deeper, almost spiritual. They argued sometimes, not out of anger, but out of shared obsession. Pep loved Joshua's intensity. Joshua loved Pep's vision. "You don't teach football," Joshua said once. "You teach thinking." Pep smiled. "And you listen better than most." As seasons passed, Kimmich grew. He wasn't the loudest player, but his influence spread quietly, like gravity. When others panicked, he stayed calm. When others hesitated, he acted. The Bayern dressing room began to see him as more than just another young player. He was becoming the brain of the team. One morning, after a training session, Lahm approached him again. "One day," he said, "this will be your team." Joshua didn't reply, but the idea settled deep inside him. Leadership wasn't something he demanded. It was something he became. Still, the journey wasn't smooth. Not everyone liked how Pep used him. Critics said he was being moved too often. Right back, midfield, even center back at times. They said Guardiola was confusing him. But Joshua disagreed. "Every position teaches me something," he told reporters calmly. "I'm not losing focus. I'm gaining understanding." Then came the match that defined his transition. Bayern faced Borussia Dortmund in a tense league fixture. Pep started Kimmich at center back, a decision that shocked fans. Dortmund's strikers were faster, stronger. Pundits predicted disaster. But Joshua played the match of his life. His tackles were clean, his positioning perfect, his passing fearless. Even when Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang sprinted toward him, he stood tall, read the run, and intercepted the ball with a calm flick. The crowd gasped. The boy from Rottweil had become a man in Munich. After the match, Pep walked into the press conference and said just one line: "He can play anywhere." That sentence changed everything. From that moment, Kimmich's reputation was sealed, not as a player with a position, but as a player with a mind. Coaches trusted him, teammates respected him, fans adored his quiet confidence. He didn't chase headlines. He chased mastery. When Pep eventually left Bayern, Joshua felt it like the end of an era. They met privately one last time in Pep's office. "You've learned everything I can teach you," Pep said. "So you must teach yourself." Joshua looked down for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you for seeing me." Pep smiled. "No," he replied. "Thank you for listening." After Pep's departure, Joshua stepped into a new world, one without the constant guidance he had relied on. He realized that now he had to become the teacher. He started taking more responsibility, on and off the pitch. In training, he corrected younger players, reminded veterans of small details, and organized drills when coaches weren't watching. Slowly, his voice began to matter. He wasn't shouting for attention. He was building authority through precision. The transition from student to leader didn't happen overnight. There were games when he doubted himself, when his perfectionism became a weight. After one tough defeat, he sat alone in the dressing room long after everyone had left. The weight of the white shirt was unlike any other. When Joshua Kimmich first stood in the tunnel wearing Germany's national colors, he felt the ghosts of giants around him. Lahm, Schweinsteiger, Kroos, Ballack, Beckenbauer. For a boy who grew up studying every movement of those men, it was not just a dream fulfilled, it was an expectation inherited. The air felt heavier, but he didn't bow under it. He took one deep breath, looked ahead and whispered to himself, "Now it's my turn to think for them." The match began, and with it a new chapter in his evolution. International football wasn't about speed or fame. It was about control, of the ball, of the moment, of emotion. And that was where Joshua lived best. The first few minutes were chaos, the rhythm faster than he had ever felt. But inside him there was stillness. While others chased, he observed. While others shouted, he positioned. He moved with invisible logic, stitching lines between players who didn't yet realize they needed connecting. When Kroos looked up and saw Kimmich offering an outlet, there was an unspoken understanding, an exchange between two minds cut from the same cloth. From that day, Germany had found its new axis. He was young, but his play spoke with the calm of experience. Reporters called him the engine, but that wasn't quite right. He wasn't just driving the team forward. He was the system that made the engine run smoothly, unseen but indispensable. His passes weren't flashy, but they broke lines. His tackles weren't violent, but they ended danger before it began. He was rhythm itself, a heartbeat in human form. At training, he rarely rested. When others took breaks, he analyzed drills. He wanted to know not only what worked, but why it worked. Teammates started teasing him. Professor Kimmich, they'd call him. But when the matches came, they followed his lead without question. He began to form a deep partnership with Toni Kroos, one of the few players who spoke his language of structure and thought. Kroos was the metronome, Joshua the engine. Together they built balance. It wasn't a relationship of words, but of timing. When one advanced, the other anchored. When one looked up, the other already knew. For Germany, it felt like order reborn. But football is cruel in its cycles. As Germany moved past its golden generation, the weight of expectation fell heavier on the new one. Joshua wasn't just playing. He was inheriting responsibility. After every defeat, microphones found him first. He didn't hide behind excuses. He spoke calmly, measured, analytical. "We lacked concentration in transitions," he'd say. "We need to control the rhythm better." The media expected emotion. He gave them reason. Some criticized him for it. "He's too mechanical," one pundit said. But those who truly understood the game recognized what was happening. He was evolving from player to architect. At major tournaments, his influence deepened. He wasn't the loudest in the locker room, but his presence commanded attention. Before matches, he'd gather the midfielders around him and explain tactical nuances, his hands sketching invisible formations in the air. "If we control the middle, we control everything," he'd say quietly. It wasn't bravado. It was clarity. Even veterans listened. It was during one of these tournaments that he truly stepped into leadership. After a disappointing loss, the room was tense, silent. Some players kept their heads down. The coach spoke briefly, then left. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Joshua stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't blame. He just spoke. "We can't expect miracles. We have to create them. That starts with discipline. Every pass, every run, every thought, it all matters." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it cut through the silence like steel. Heads lifted. Something shifted. The next match, Germany played differently. Not just with skill, but with conviction. He began to realize that leadership wasn't about speeches or gestures. It was about consistency. When things went wrong, he stayed steady. When pressure mounted, he became quieter, not louder. His teammates learned to read his silences. They meant focus, not doubt. Coaches started building systems around him. They trusted him to adapt, to self-correct, to guide others in real time. In tactical meetings, his insights became essential. He'd interrupt politely, suggesting minor adjustments that often changed the outcome of matches. "If we push the line 5 meters higher, they'll lose their outlet." More often than not, he was right. He had studied Germany's footballing DNA since childhood. Precision, discipline, unity, and now he embodied it. But even machines have breaking points. After one difficult tournament, where criticism rained like storm clouds, he was targeted as part of the system problem. Reporters said he was too rigid, too serious, too analytical. They wanted fire. He gave them reflection. If we lose, he said, we must first understand why before we burn everything down. Fans didn't always like that. But within the team, his calm became their shield. He didn't let emotion dictate response. He believed that structure rebuilds faster than chaos. Behind the scenes, his life remained simple. He didn't seek fame or distractions. When others celebrated with parties, he spent evenings reading or watching tactical breakdowns. He kept a journal still, as he had since Leipzig. But the words were different now. Less about improvement, more about meaning. Leadership is patience, one entry read. Sometimes it's silence that moves people most. Another, you can't control everything, but you can always control your standards. He learned that leadership also meant empathy. When younger players joined the national team, nervous, overwhelmed, he took time to talk to them privately. Don't chase perfection, he'd tell them. Chase progress. They looked up to him, not because he was the loudest, but because he made them feel capable. His discipline wasn't intimidation. It was invitation, a standard they wanted to reach. During one Nations League match, Germany struggled early. The midfield was fragmented, confidence fading. On the sideline, coaches shouted instructions. Joshua raised his hand and motioned for calm. He walked to each player, speaking briefly, adjusting positions. Within minutes, order returned. It wasn't magic, it was awareness. Afterward, a journalist asked how he stayed composed under pressure. He smiled faintly. You can't control the wind, he said, but you can adjust your sails. He began to see football less as competition and more as expression. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about understanding harmony between teammates, systems, and self. And so, year after year, tournament after tournament, he carried the weight of the German shirt with quiet pride. No drama, no arrogance, no spectacle, just relentless precision. He didn't chase legacy, he built it in silence. And as the years passed, the boy from Rottweil, who once stayed late after training to study patterns in the snow, became the mind of a nation's football. When fans chanted his name, it wasn't for flair or fame. It was for what he represented: discipline, clarity, and belief. In an age of noise, he remained the calm voice of order. He didn't just play football. He conducted it. The noise had changed. It was no longer the cheer of victory or the rhythm of applause. It was doubt. The same journalists who once praised his intelligence now questioned his ambition. The same fans who admired his perfection now called him rigid, predictable, too serious. Time had moved on, as it always does in football, and with it came a new generation hungry for chaos and spontaneity. Joshua Kimmich, once the symbol of order, now stood in the middle of a storm. It began subtly. A few bad results, a few moments when the team didn't click, a few missed passes that became headlines. He felt it before he read it. The change in tone, the impatience, the turning tide. Leadership, he realized, was easy when you were winning. It was only real when you were losing. He trained the same way, studied the same way, led the same way. But suddenly people questioned it. He's overthinking, they said. He's too obsessed with control. They didn't understand that control was the only thing that had ever saved him. Injuries came too. Little ones at first, then one that kept him out for weeks. He watched from the sidelines, powerless, while the world went on without him. The rhythm of the game moved forward, fast and merciless. For a man built on purpose, stillness was torture. But in that silence, he found something unexpected: reflection. For the first time in years, he had no drills to run, no data to analyze, no matches to plan for. He sat at home, staring at his journal, pages filled with order, logic, strategy, and he began to write something different. Leadership is not control, he scribbled. It's connection. It was a sentence that would change him more than any coach ever had. He started visiting the team even when he couldn't play, talking to younger players, sitting beside them at lunch, asking about their lives instead of their positioning. He realized that not everyone was like him. Not everyone needed perfection to feel alive. Some needed laughter, some needed belief, some needed silence. Leadership wasn't one formula. It was translation, understanding how different minds respond to pressure. He began to listen more, speak less. When he did talk, his words carried new warmth. "You don't have to be perfect," he told one young midfielder. "You just have to stay brave." The boy nodded, eyes wide. In that moment, Joshua saw himself years earlier, quiet, unsure, desperate to be understood. When he returned to the pitch months later, something in him had shifted. He still demanded precision, still chased structure, but his energy felt different. It wasn't the sharp edge of control. It was the steady rhythm of trust. His teammates sensed it. He encouraged instead of corrected. He praised instead of pressured. The team began to respond. They played freer, lighter, but still within his framework. That balance, freedom within discipline, became his new philosophy. But storms don't end overnight. The criticism continued. Some said he had lost his edge. Others said he was still trying too hard to lead. It didn't bother him anymore. He had stopped playing for approval a long time ago. What hurt wasn't the words, but the realization that people often misunderstood dedication for ego. In interviews, he spoke carefully, choosing words that reflected maturity instead of defensiveness. "When you want to win," he said once, "you risk being misunderstood." That's fine. I'd rather be misunderstood than uncommitted. His body was aging faster now. The endless seasons, the travel, the mental strain, it all took its toll. But he adapted again as he always had. He learned to train smarter, not harder, to rest without guilt, to accept limits without surrendering standards. He started mentoring more actively, both in Bayern and in the national team. Younger players gravitated to him, not because of his fame, but because of his steadiness. He was a safe presence, the calm in the chaos. One night after a tough defeat, the team bus was silent. Everyone stared at their phones, frustration thick in the air. Joshua stood up slowly, walked to the front, and turned to face them. "I know it hurts," he said quietly. "It's supposed to. But this pain means you still care. Don't ever lose that." Then he sat down. No speeches, no slogans, just truth. The next day, they trained like a new team. Coaches said later that something had changed, not in tactics, but in spirit. He began to be called the conscience of Bayern. Reporters used the phrase often, but he didn't like it. Conscience sounded moral, distant. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be useful. Still, he carried that weight with humility. When teammates made mistakes, he defended them publicly and corrected them privately. When the team struggled, he faced the media first. He believed leadership meant absorbing pressure so others could breathe. There were nights when the noise outside felt too loud. After losses, he'd drive home in silence, the city lights blurring past his window. He wouldn't turn on the radio. He didn't need more voices. He'd get home, sit by the window, and watch the dark. His wife sometimes found him there, quiet, thoughtful. "You can't carry it all," she told him. He smiled. "If not me, who?" He began reading philosophy in those quiet hours. Stoicism, psychology, philosophy of sport, Marcus Aurelius, Viktor Frankl, books about focus and presence. They didn't change who he was. They explained who he had always been. "Control yourself," he wrote one night, "and the world loses its power to control you." But leadership was no longer just about football. He started speaking publicly about discipline, education, mindset. He visited schools, charities, hospitals. He didn't bring cameras or sponsors. He went because he understood that football fame could reach places speeches never could. When a teacher thanked him for his time, he replied, "They need to know that discipline is not punishment. It's freedom." And still, he trained like the world was watching. His love for the game never dimmed. He still arrived first, still stayed late, still demanded intensity in every drill. Only now, when others made mistakes, he laughed more. "We'll fix it," he'd say. The perfectionist had become patient. The boy obsessed with structure had learned to live within imperfection. Then came another wave of criticism. The media saying his best years were over, that Germany needed new blood. He didn't argue. He just played. And when he played, the rhythm returned. Calm, sharp, intelligent. He wasn't the fastest anymore, but his brain still moved quicker than anyone's. In one match, after setting up 2 goals, a young teammate hugged him and said, "You make it look easy." Joshua smiled. "That's the hardest part." In those years, he also began preparing for life beyond football. He talked often with coaches, analysts, sports psychologists, not about retiring, but about transition. He wanted to understand how to lead even without playing. The game doesn't end when the whistle blows, he said. It just changes shape. He started mentoring even off the field, helping design youth development programs, giving lectures on mental discipline. It wasn't glamorous. It was purposeful. There was one moment, late in a long season, when everything came full circle. After a painful defeat, he stayed alone in the dressing room, sitting quietly as the noise faded outside. He thought of the boy in Rottweil, the one who studied football tapes on an old television, who dreamed of being understood. He thought of Pep, of Lahm, of Kroos, of every lesson carved into the years, and for the first time he smiled without frustration. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. The journey itself had been the proof. The next morning he woke early, as always. He brewed coffee, opened his notebook, and wrote 3 sentences. You can't stop the storm. You learn to walk through it, and when you do, you realize the storm was never against you. It was shaping you. He closed the book, packed his bag, and went to training. The doubts never truly disappeared. No real competitor ever loses them completely, but he no longer feared them. They were reminders that he still cared. When fans cheered, he nodded politely. When critics shouted, he listened calmly. And when young players asked him how to stay strong, he told them the truth. You don't. You just stay steady. Because that's what leadership had become to him, not perfection, not control, not dominance. Just steadiness. The kind that keeps a team standing when everything else begins to shake. The kind that doesn't need headlines or applause. The kind that remains even when the noise fades. And in that steadiness, in that quiet resilience, Joshua Kimmich found something greater than victory. Peace. The stadium was quiet now. Empty seats glowed faintly under the floodlights, the grass glimmering with the last drops of water from the sprinklers. Joshua Kimmich stood in the center circle, his hands on his hips, his head slightly lowered. He wasn't thinking about the match that had just ended, or the season, or even the next one. He was thinking about time, how fast it moves, how much it gives, and how gently it takes things away. Around him, echoes lingered, the ghostly sound of cheers, of footsteps, of memory. He smiled softly. It all went so fast, he whispered. But in truth, he wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Years had passed since he first walked onto this field as a nervous young player, with too many thoughts and too much discipline. He had become everything he once studied, the leader, the general, the thinker, but he had also become something else, calm. There was no more hunger to prove, no more noise to chase. The fire still burned, yes, but it burned quietly now. Steady, deep, warm. His body had slowed, but his mind had only sharpened. He no longer saw football as a battle. He saw it as music, movement, timing, connection. He no longer played to control the game. He played to understand it, and through it to understand himself. You could see it in how he moved. Every touch had meaning, every pause purpose. Younger players around him played faster, louder, flashier. But when Joshua touched the ball, time seemed to stretch. The chaos slowed. The noise dimmed. The ball obeyed and everyone else followed. He had become what he always wanted to be, invisible yet essential. The media still followed him, of course, but their tone had changed. They no longer called him mechanical or cold. Now they called him timeless. Kimmich plays football the way silence plays music, one writer said. He smiled when he read that. It wasn't poetry to him. It was truth. In the Bayern dressing room, his locker sat next to a teenager's, a new academy graduate with wide eyes and endless energy. Joshua saw himself in the boy. One day after training, the kid asked him, "How do you stay so calm when everyone else panics?" Joshua thought for a moment and said, "Because I stopped fighting the game. I started listening to it." The boy didn't understand yet, but he would one day. That's how lessons work. They arrive quietly and only time reveals their meaning. He had become more than a footballer to Bayern. He was the anchor, the voice of balance, the living memory of a generation. When he spoke now, coaches listened. When he paused, others waited. It wasn't power. It was respect. He didn't demand it. He earned it in silence, day by day, year by year. At home, life was slower. Mornings began with his children's laughter instead of alarms. He still trained, still studied matches, but not with the same urgency. He used to chase the idea of being perfect. Now he chased the feeling of being present. "You can't hold time," he told a journalist once. "You can only live it well." He had learned to find beauty in stillness, in quiet breakfasts, in long walks, in moments that once felt too small to notice. And yet, every time he stepped onto the pitch, the old rhythm returned. His heart still beat faster under the lights. The crowd still made him feel alive. Football wasn't just his career. It was his language, the way he communicated with the world, and the world still listened. There came a moment, inevitable in every great career, when questions about the future began. "How much longer will you play?" reporters asked. He never gave a direct answer. He would just smile and say, "As long as I can still think faster than I run." It wasn't arrogance. It was honesty. He knew his body had limits, but his mind was still years ahead. He had already started preparing the next chapter. Coaching, maybe? Mentoring? Definitely. But more than that, he wanted to help young players understand what football truly was. Not just competition, but connection. "Everyone wants to win," he said once, "but only a few understand how to build something worth winning with." He wanted to teach that. He wanted to teach patience, clarity, and the power of thought. He wanted to show them that emotion without structure was noise, and structure without emotion was emptiness. The club, the fans, even his rivals knew. When Kimmich spoke, it wasn't just about football. It was about life. "The game teaches you everything," he said once. "How to work, how to fail, how to forgive yourself. It's not about trophies. It's about what kind of person you become when no one's watching." He didn't fear the end. In fact, he had started to embrace it. Every match felt like a conversation with time. A thank you, a goodbye, a promise. He played not to prove he could still dominate, but to say farewell with grace. Younger players asked him how he stayed motivated. "Because every game is one less I get to play," he answered. And that makes each one sacred. There were tributes, interviews, documentaries. They called him one of the most intelligent players of his generation. He didn't dwell on it. Praise had never built him, work had. He was proudest not of his trophies, but of his habits. The early mornings, the endless notes, the discipline that had carried him when the noise was too loud. "Talent gets you seen," he once told a reporter. "Discipline keeps you remembered." Germany, too, had changed. He was now the veteran, guiding a new wave of players who looked to him for direction. In training, he no longer shouted tactics. He asked questions. "Why did you choose that pass?" He'd say, "What did you see?" He wasn't giving orders anymore. He was teaching them to think. That was his true legacy. Not just as a leader, but as a thinker who passed his curiosity on to others. One evening, during a Nations League match, he came on as a substitute late in the game. The stadium was half dark, the air thick with summer heat. As he stepped onto the pitch, the fans rose, not because of a goal, but because of gratitude. They knew what he had given, years of steadiness, clarity, loyalty. Every movement he made that night felt deliberate, ceremonial. When the whistle blew, he lifted his hand in quiet thanks. The cameras caught his eyes glistening, though he would later laugh it off. It was just the floodlights, he said. But everyone knew better. Back in the dressing room, younger teammates hugged him. "You'll never really leave, will you?" one of them said. Joshua smiled. No one really leaves if their lessons stay. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked out onto the balcony. The city lights of Munich spread beneath him. He thought about the years. Leipzig, Pep, Germany, the storms, the silence. He thought about every version of himself he had outgrown, every moment that had shaped him. And for once he didn't analyze or plan. He just felt gratitude, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. He took out an old notebook, the same one he had carried since he was a boy. The pages were yellowed, corners bent, filled with words written in tiny, disciplined handwriting. On the first page, it still said, "Think before you move." He smiled. On the last page, still blank, he wrote a single line. "Now I move without thinking." It wasn't about giving up control. It was about becoming one with it. The mind that once studied every pass had finally learned to let the game flow through him. When people asked him years later what his secret was, he'd say simply, "Focus. That's all. Focus on what matters and the rest will follow." But what he meant, and what few truly understood, was that focus wasn't about narrowing vision. It was about expanding awareness, seeing the game, the world, and yourself all at once. As time moved on, his role changed again. He started working more closely with the academy, designing programs to teach young players not only technique, but mentality. You can't build greatness on chaos, he told them. But you also can't build it without love. He talked about balance, about being human, about thinking and feeling in equal measure. He was no longer just a footballer. He was a philosopher in boots. And when he finally decided to step away, not with a press conference or a tearful farewell, but quietly, as he had always lived, the world didn't mourn. It reflected, because Joshua Kimmich had never been the story. He had been the structure behind it. Years later, people still spoke his name not with excitement, but with respect. "He made us think differently," one coach said. "He made football feel intelligent again." His legacy wasn't written in goals or highlights. It was written in the rhythm he left behind, the balance, the patience, the quiet excellence, and sometimes, in the stillness of the Allianz Arena at night, when the lights dimmed and the city slept, a few staff members swore they could still feel it, that calm presence in the air, that invisible order that once guided every heartbeat on the pitch. It was Joshua Kimmich, not the captain, not the midfielder, just the mind of a legend.